Good morning, Board. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm here to respond to your document today about my retirement. This will give me a good chance to clear up some issues that the Retirement Board has raised. I'm sorry I'm going to have to read from my notes. I'm much more comfortable ad-libbing, but since there's so many issues and so many points to cover, this is the only way I can be confident that I'm going to be able to cover them all. Why I haven't been contacted by the Retirement Board for input, or anyone else for that matter, is beyond me. Perhaps I could have assisted in understanding either the historical aspect of what has happened to affect my retirement, or helped to explain the documents that Reed Smith obviously couldn't decipher. I appreciate that District Counsel Mr. Lieberman has just admitted that he doesn't know all the facts and it's not a complete investigation. I do want to repeat that Mr. Lieberman did just quote that your decisions must be reasonable and therefore your determination must be based on fact. And I hope I can clear up some of these facts for you. 6 years into my retirement, with 4 weeks' notice, you've asked me to respond to statements and allegations produced in the Reed Smith memorandum. And if it's okay with you from now on, just to save a couple words, I'm just going to call it the Reed document. At the very last second, at the beginning of this last month, we were forced to cancel our vacation at the very last minute with very little time to prepare. So a lot of the folks that I'd like to have gotten in touch with and obtained affidavits from either on vacation or have been unable to respond to my request. I haven't heard back from a few, but I'll give you their phone numbers and you can call them and ask them for validation or verification on anything that I'm saying. I found that there is very few attorneys who are able to take a case on such short notice. I happen to get very lucky, but that took some doing in order to find an attorney. I've located many hard copy documents and electric files that were very helpful with me putting together a response for you, but I haven't been able to put my hands on all of them just yet. I've done the best I can, and I'll try to pull up any information that you would like as we go through this as well. I have a box full of stuff there, which I will be referring to, so if you want validation on anything, I'm happy to go there and find that for you. If there's something I'm missing, if it would provide you with any more clarification, please let me know so I can research it, and if I can find it, I'll provide it to the board. I do have several affidavits that I'll be sharing with you, and I do have at least one speaker here on my behalf. Regardless of whatever happens, I hope I have assembled enough information and validation to be able to clear up any issues that you have and keeping this from going for any further litigation. While I go through each of these points, I want to make sure that you're crystal clear on exactly everything that I'm trying to convey to you and all of the points that I'm trying to make. Please don't gloss over anything. If you don't understand something, please let's stay on point until you do, or until I've made it sufficiently clear with the direction where I'm headed with this discussion. And just a quick heads up, you're probably going to be wondering why some of the things I'm saying early on in my response to this document. Later on, it will probably become very clear, but there are points that I need to make early that will be used to validate comments that I'll make later on. As I respond to the many points in the Reed document, I'll cite the page, paragraph, and line number. If the quote is small enough, I'll quote it word for word or re-quote it word for word. Otherwise, I'll try to paraphrase it for you. If it's a full page or a large paragraph, I'll paraphrase it. I'll let you know which page it is, and then we can move on from there. I've also given each of my line responses in my document that I'm speaking from right now. I've given it a number, so if you want to get back to that, just ask me for that number. I'll give you the number, and that way I can refer to it back later on when we want to discuss that one little aspect of my discussion. I'm also going to start with a disclaimer for when I speak about the individuals who I served on the Moraga Board of Directors. They were my bosses, and to a person, they're all wonderful individuals, intelligent, caring, hardworking, and community-oriented. It's hard to put into words the amount of effort they put into their positions and how much adversity they took head-on from the community. The press, unions, and the endless strings of gadflies who would come in to each board meeting and try to beat them down. They did it all voluntarily. I have nothing but praise for them. There were some glitches, though, and those are some of the problems that I'm going to try to explain to you as the process continued in my chiefdom, as they called it. Even though they tried to work collectively as a team, or at times they didn't understand the workload that they were putting on us, we tried to reinforced to them that there were some issues that they needed to get over. We're going to talk about those issues as well. So in our discussion, if I sound negative about talking about the board, I'm talking about the interaction as a group process, not them as individuals. I'm not here to make you believe that I have any due course negative aspects about the board members. They were all wonderful, they were good people, and in fact I have one of them here today to answer your questions or speak to some of the talking points that I'm going to be bringing up. While I'm talking about board members, this is also the time to put this little issue to bed. In the newspaper article that was placed in your packet as Exhibit 15, the question was asked, there's a question of whether Mr. Nowicki hoodwinked to the board. And in the read text, there's several instances that would have the reader believe I masterminded some elaborate scheme to slink off into the night with ill-gotten gains. We're talking about 6 of the most intelligent individuals I've ever had the pleasure of working with. I was working with a doctor, an attorney, a real estate developer, a consultant to Stanford University, and a lieutenant in the San Francisco Fire Department, and a licensed actuary. They're honorable men who did exactly what they were asked by the community. So right now what I'd like to do is go step by step down the report, and I will cite the different portions of the read document that I would like to respond to. Number 1, page 1, paragraph 3, middle of line 4, quote, further, it appears that Mr. Nowicki improperly caused his compensation to be increased or overstated twice during his final year of service for the express purpose of increasing his retirement allowance. My response is, I didn't do anything improper. What I did was the job of my best ability every day for over 26 years. I was told that what I would be due at the end of my career. I followed the direction of the retirement board. I made my life decisions based on those rules and directions from Cicera. And now in today's discussion, I'm being told that my increases were improper. I'm going to talk about each one of those allegations one at a time as we go down them. Page 2.
Question, Mr. Nowicki?
Yes, sir.
You're not suggesting in your testimony that anybody from the retirement board staff or board members advised you to change your contract, are you?
No, what I'm saying is I took direction from the retirement counselors when we came in here. They would tell us to shoot for the best retirement you could, and here's the opportunities that you have in your contract to utilize them to the best of your ability.
But your testimony isn't that you got advice from Cicera to process contract amendments to change, for instance,
no, sir,
vacation
not at all.
setback, right?
Not at all.
All right.
Page 2, in the subtitle it says factual background, unquote. I would go ahead and strike through that. This document is full of guesses and assumptions that lack any valid foundation, and I'll explain why with my validation, with my handouts that I have given you as well as my exhibits. I'm sorry, did somebody say something? No, okay. Page 2, paragraph 1, line 1, quote, there are 5 main events relevant to the evaluation of Nowicki's retirement allowance, unquote. My response is I wish it really was that simple. There's hundreds of events relevant to the evaluation of my retirement allowance. I'm going to discuss many of them that for some reason did not make it into the read document. I'm going to validate them with memos. I have a box of all kinds of documents there that if you want, once again, validation, I'd be happy to do that. I have W-2s, reports, affidavits, notes that I was able to dig up. Page 2, paragraph 2, line 1. Quote, Nowicki joined MOFD in 1983 and became a member of Cicera at that time, unquote. My response is absolutely that's true, but then the report goes ahead and jumps to when I become promoted to fire chief. You can't just jump over 23 years of service as if that doesn't matter to set the stage for my becoming the chief and the actions that I'm going to take in that, sitting in that position. I'm not going to let the report gloss over my background and how it set the manner and how I conducted myself as fire chief. In 1983, at 25 years old, I already had 2 college degrees, completed EMT and paramedic school, finished my first 5 years of military service, 2 summers with the forestry service, 2 years of full-time employment with San Francisco Ambulance Company, and did side jobs as a mechanic, lifeguard, fire alarm technician, among others. I had no less than 2 full-time jobs from high school as I promoted from battalion chief, which means I worked a second full-time job at MOFD for 20 years while I was a firefighter. At the same time, I went back to school. I already had 2 college degrees, and I earned an additional degree in criminology and a master's degree in exercise physiology. I also received my California State teaching credential. My second job that most consumed my off-duty time while I was working at the fire district was 13 years with the city of San Francisco as a paramedic. I enhanced my own skills and brought that knowledge and those capabilities back to the district, and I taught those capabilities to our own firefighters. I became certified with the state fire marshal as a driver operator, company officer, and later a chief officer, brought those skills back to the district and taught my subordinates as well. I became certified to instruct the American Heart Association, taught that for the district. I became certified and taught for American Red Cross, taught those skills to the district. I became a certified hazmat specialist as well as an instructor for CSTI, and then taught those curriculums to the district, as well as at Confire and several other agencies in the Bay Area. I became an instructor for the California State Fire Marshal and Technical Rescue, brought those skills back, taught those locally. When I stopped working for the city of San Francisco, and I think that was in 1996, I became a paramedic instructor for both Las Medanas College in Contra, Costa, and Las Positas in Alameda County. And I continued to teach until about 2001, when we were being overwhelmed in the district with work, and that's when I was a battalion chief. During 23 years in the lower ranks, I continued to serve in the military on weekends and in the summer, and that ended in 2006 with a high tenure discharge with the Navy after 28 years. As a firefighter, prior to promoting up, besides my regular duties in the fire station, I instructed and performed training with the district. I did outside reciprocal training. I wrote budgets for the battalion chiefs. I wrote grant proposals. I wrote and reviewed district policy and sat on the safety, heavy rescue, and wellness committees. And that's just a touch of my extracurricular activity within the district. I showed up at all Moraga Fire and MOFD, and there's a difference. Moraga Fire was the independent, separate district before we merged with Moraga Orinda Fire District. Regardless of whether it was required or if there was any compensation, I always bumped up for coverage whenever asked, and I was one of the few who answered the phone every time the district called and responded back into the station for coverage. I lost money doing that many times because I wouldn't make enough money to come in and cover this district as the amount of money that I paid for the gas and the bridge fare to get there. Why did I do all these things? Because they were the right thing to do. I only called in sick 4 times in 26 years. Never in the history of the district, and I would challenge in the history of the county, has anyone ever been so diligent in getting to work. But then again, at a recent public meeting, I was admonished when a speaker announced that banking my sick leave increased my retirement, and I should be ashamed of myself. Doing the math, at an overtime rate of 60 to 70 hours, $60 to $70 an hour in today's dollars, that alone saved the district $200,000 in overtime. If you check the retirements of many firefighters, it's commonplace that you retire on 0 hours of sick leave balance. I'm proud of my record. I was on workers' comp twice in my career, once with a shoulder injury and once from an elbow injury. After recovering from the shoulder injury, I received a settlement check in the mail from the county. I sent it back. The workers' comp division sent the check back to me and then followed up with a phone call that I was the only one ever to send a check back, but to please cash it because it was going to be problematic if I didn't. I still didn't want to cash it, and I held on to it for quite some time until I got another phone call and they asked me with stronger wording to go ahead and cash it. During my elbow injury, the fire chief found out that I was teaching at Confire and called me in. He was quite upset, telling me I couldn't make money while I was on disability. I wasn't. I was volunteering, which started another gray area discussion. Can an employee volunteer to provide service time in another county while he's on disability? Let's go ahead and fast forward to my retirement. How many employees, and especially firefighters, go out on a disability pension? While I was a chief officer and I was handling human resources, so many of my soon-to-be retirees suddenly had back pain or hearing loss 2 weeks before they filed for retirement. And that's not unique to MFD, that's every fire department in California, I would hazard to guess, in the United States. I didn't go out on a disability retirement, I'm proud of that. But every month I still see my ex-coworkers on the CICERA agenda trying to get disability approvals. So let's go back and finish up setting the tone for my future as a BC and as the fire chief. I studied and took every promotional exam offered, and I was promoted each time. In 2000, there was a surprise opening for the position of battalion chief. I took the job. And what you need to know is what faced the battalion chiefs at that point. The battalion chief work schedule was 70 work hours a week, We were required to backfill an additional 12 shifts a year. We were expected to be in the district for all staff meetings, budget meetings, board meetings, etc. I was asked to take over the position of Human Resources Administrator, for which there had been none since the inception of the district in 1997. That being the case, I had to be in the district for all interviews, hirings, firings, promotions, workers' comp issues, safety meetings, labor management meetings, meet and confer, negotiations, and everything else expected me of the chief. All the BCs were required to be on duty, to be the duty chief 25% of their time off. You guys would know that as standby time. We didn't get overtime, we didn't get pass-through pay for out-of-district responses, and for the most part, we were in the district 90% of our lives at the station, not only on our own shifts, but there for special projects or to cover the other battalion chiefs who were off. Our work schedule only changed when the district adopted 48-96 schedule, but that really only cut out our mandatory 8-hour office day. And when the other BCs were offline, the remaining BCs had to pick up the slack. For example, when BC Goodyear was gone most of the summers on strike teams, or when BC Homes had a serious injury, the other BCs still standing had to assume those responsibilities as well. And you're probably wondering why I'm telling you this, because I'm going to need to address those issues and renegotiate with the BCs to fix some of these problems when I become chief. Unfortunately, the Reed document applies that I negotiated their contract to my own benefit, and that is so far from reality, I can't even begin to tell you, and we're going to talk about that a little bit here. So let's go back to the Reed document. Page 2, paragraph 2, line 12. On or about July 10th, 2006, Nowicki entered into an employment contract with the district to serve as fire chief for a 4-year term ending July 9th, 2010. My response is, in June 2006, I met with Director Gordon Nathan, president of the board, and Chief Jim Johnston, and they presented me a contract. I told them I could not take the position based on the terms in the contract, knowing that I was jumping into a quagmire of trouble, and I'll explain what that quagmire of trouble is here in just a second. And I was being offered a salary and benefits almost going backwards. The proposed contract was 5% more than what I was making as a BC, and if you look at your Exhibit 1 there, there's a copy of the memorandum that went to the board, not from me, down at the bottom, highlighted that what I would be getting to become the chief of the department was 5% more than what I was already getting. I would also then be missing out on most of the benefits that I had been getting for my 6-year duration as battalion chief. According to the contract on the table, being promoted to chief at this time meant I lost my vacation buyback, I lost a holiday, my vacation hours were reduced, I no longer had sick leave buyout, my admin hours were reduced, and along with a host of other perks that I was losing to take a promotion to an area of greater responsibility. After long discussions with Chief Johnston and Director Nathan, they impressed upon me that their hands were tied to what they could offer a new chief, and they kept stressing, don't blow it, and if you ask for anything else, that's going to be a deal killer. They continued to constantly come back to the fact that so far I had proven myself well as a BC, but I haven't proven myself as a fire chief, and they couldn't compensate me anymore until I had done that. A few points from that discussion I'd like to raise. Number one, they told me they would not use the existing chief's contract as a reference. Even though I was going to assume the same rank, do the same job, they knew I was jumping into a quagmire, but I was going to get paid $10,000 a year less. Number two, the contract was going to be structured differently than Chief Johnston's previous contract. If you go to Exhibit number 2 in your packet, the highlighted portion, the board at that time decided that they were going to build into Chief Johnston's contract 6% increase in salary every year, so they wouldn't have to come back to the table every year. That was fine for him. Instead of being provided annual salary adjustments written to the contract, Director Nathan said the board opted for annual negotiated adjustments as part of the performance review. I said that would be fine, either way that they wanted to do it. They could put it in the contract at that point, or we could come back and we could meet and they could pay me what they thought I was worth during my performance review every year. If they didn't do one of those two options, I would have taken the job. I'm not going to become fire chief for 4 years and sit stagnant while everybody else is getting ahead, either with benefits or salaries, whatever it might be. Number 3, when I pointed out the non-salary disparities between my existing job and what they were offering me, we discussed each of those benefits. Vacation sellback was specifically discussed, and they asked if that issue was going to be a big deal in 2006 before accepting this contract. I told them that it wasn't going to be a big deal. So they promised me they would correct it at the end of my first year as fire chief. That would be July of 2007. Along with discussions about reinstating the other disappearing benefits that we also talked about, those other smaller sidecars that I was going to be losing by taking a position of greater responsibility. Remember, I also had vacation sellback from 2000 through 2005, so this wasn't unusual. I wasn't asking for a new benefit that nobody had ever heard of. I just resented accepting a promotion and as a result being rewarded by losing the value of the position that I was already in. If they hadn't made me that promise, I absolutely wouldn't have taken the position. It would have been foolish to have done so.
May I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Is the summary in the Reed-Smith letter on page 2 of your 2006 contract correct or not?
Repeat, please. Is the summary on?
Well, yeah, you started this portion of your testimony referring to page 2 of the Reed-Smith letter with respect to your 2006
Okay,
contract. I'm just asking you, is that summary that's in the letter correct or not?
I'd have to go back and reread it. If you want to go, we can go back and look at it.
I'm just asking the question.
Most of the numbers that were quoted came directly out of the contract if we're talking about numbers.
I'm asking you about the summary that's on page 2 of the letter. You started your testimony in rebutting items in the Reed-Smith letter, and I'm just trying to follow along with you and understand if that recitation of your 2006 contract is accurate or not. If it's not accurate, tell me what's wrong with it.
Well, going down them line by line,
All right.
I would have to pull that page out and.
I want you to testify however you want to testify.
Let's see where I was here. So number 4, we ended up with the gentleman's agreement that at the end of my 12-month period and a favorable evaluation, in my second year we will collectively structure those prominent benefits that I had as a BC back into my contract, especially in light of the salary being on the lower side. On that same line 12, the Reed document states that my contract was a 4-year term. I need to explain this. It leads the reader to believe that there should have been no changes for 4 years. That's not the case. Let's be clear, the contracts are written like this so that with a contract employee such as myself, at some point, if the board wanted to go a different direction at the end of 4 years, they could do so without any ramifications. They could shake your hand and you could walk out the door. At the most, they would have to put up with a mediocre fire chief for 48 months. It also gives a modest amount of job security to an applicant who just moved from a secure employment to an at-will position. I was going from a position where I was doing my job, that's what I needed to do in order to stay within the district for however long I chose. But now I'm going into an at-will position where at any time I could lose my job.
So let me make sure I understand it. Did you have a verbal side agreement with the board regarding your contract?
I did.
And that's what you called a gentleman's agreement?
Yes. And that's the terms they used.
And was that agreement reached in an open session of the district's board meeting?
No, it was not.
And where was that agreement reached?
In the chief's office, when they presented me with the contract.
And how many of the board was present when that occurred?
The president and the chief.
So the president of the board and you?
Yes. The president of the board, myself, and the fire chief, the sitting fire chief at the time.
At the time.
Great.
Thank you.
For a 4-year contract such as this, you can make the contract hard and fast, or you can renegotiate it at agreed upon intervals. In my case, we agreed upon annual reviews and contract discussions. If the board was to have only considered a hard and fast contract when they offered me the position, I would have considered only accepting it if they picked up where the salary of the previous chief had left off, with built-in salary adjustments just like the previous chief, with vacation sellback just like I had when I was a battalion chief, and with other sidecars available to the battalion chiefs, the smaller sidecars, and with a built-in compaction clause. You never want to have your subordinates making more than you when you are trying to manage them. Anything less than that would have been refused by me. If I did have such a contract, my retirement would be much higher than it is today because all of those built-in things would have been taking place over the period of time, including that first year that I was in service. The agreement we ultimately reached would be annual adjustments to the salary and benefits. I would be open to modifying my job description and expectations from the board. We were then to collectively perform a performance evaluation and discuss the contract amendments each July. I'll get to you how we proceeded with those performance evaluations and how they started and where they went one at a time as we get to those points in the READ document. Let's go back to that quagmire I mentioned earlier. To start with, does anybody here know what a firefighter job action is? It's an aggressive work slowdown. At MOFD, one started in 2001, just prior to the contract that was ratified in 2002. It continued past the ratification into 2003, and it started again in 2005, and as far as I know, went through to 2014. I don't know that for sure. And it may not have even ended yet, but I have a sneaking suspicion it has. The firefighters refuse to do anything other than the very basic tasks of what their job descriptions are, and it's a childish way of trying to force the hand of the fire chief and the board during negotiation. They won't work on special projects, they won't serve on committees, they won't initiate anything beyond what's required without a direct order. My first day as chief, I inherited that job action by the firefighters. But I want to make one thing really clear, absolutely crystal clear. Even though they chose this naive way of performing negotiations for the contract, in no way did it, or would I allow it to affect their ability to respond to emergencies, how they behave themselves outside, their training, all of the professional aspects of their job. They were the best firefighters I have ever seen, and they did not allow contract negotiations or a job action to affect how they treated the community or how they dealt with emergencies. So I don't want there to be any misunderstanding there. This was a labor issue. The others are community response issues. There was no mixing the two. Besides the job action, the day I took the seat as the fire chief, I was also down 2 of my 4 battalion chief positions with no qualified in-house candidates. The district budget was a mess. It was off by over $1 million when I tried to reconcile it in my first few weeks. And when I couldn't, I started working with our financial administrator who couldn't either, and then she quit. The local was being especially adversarial at meet and confirm more than I had ever seen before, and I don't know why. It was that time we also needed to try to put the pieces together and try to staff a new ambulance at Station 45. We needed to provide participation on 2 ballot initiatives. I had grievances waiting for me on my desk. We were working to complete a necessary arrangement to be included in the Oakland USAR team. I inherited 2 district lawsuits, and I absolutely needed to continue to pursue a close working relationship that we were doing with Bickmore and Associates on getting a handle on our workers' comp issues. Add to this, within several months, my fire marshal was then tapped to become the California State Fire Marshal, and she resigned. So then I had the pleasure of wearing the hat of the fire marshal as well as the fire chief, and then we had to go through the entire recruiting process and the testing process for a new one. To round out the year, we started to plunge in the worst economy ever since the 1930s. So why is this important? Because the READ document points out that in my original contract, I was blessed with vacation, admin leave, and holidays, to which from now on I'm just going to refer to it as PTO, paid time off. I did accrue those benefits, but what the document fails to explain is I couldn't use them. And let's just talk about the first year. I expected to work 40 hours a week. I expected to work more than 40 hours a week. I would work until the job was done. But everything was piling up so quickly that my staff and I were hanging on by a thread, especially being short-staffed, being down 2 battalion chiefs, no financial officer, and now the fire marshal is gone. I was working an average of over 100 hours a week, sleeping at the firehouse, sleeping at my desk, coming in on holidays and weekends, and unable to take any holiday or PTO time off. Right now, if you would like to validate what I've just told you, Battalion Chief Lee is on his phone at Station 45. He's willing to do a conference call with you anytime during this meeting to reconfirm the things that I've told you. So please don't hesitate to do that if you would like to.
I had a question for you. What was the gentleman's agreement that you described reached prior to your signing the employment agreement?
Yes, it was.
How long before? Day, hour? You know?
Before I actually put ink on paper, I'd say it was probably a few days a week.
And was it Mr. Nathan, the board president, who advised you of this agreement?
Both he and the sitting chief.
Did Mr. Nathan tell you that he'd spoken to other board members and that he had an assurance that this was an agreement you could rely on?
Well, when it was discussed then in open session, it was brought up at that point again that there were going to be future issues that are going to be need to brought to the board's attention and changes that are going to be made to the contract to make me, they used the word whole, to make me whole on the benefits I had already been receiving, that I wouldn't be, and they also used the word probationary period, which there is no probationary period for a chief. You're a chief or you're not. At the end of the probationary period, to go back to visit those issues and be made whole on those issues.
And are there board of directors meeting minutes that reflect that conversation?
I didn't go that far back into the minutes to find out. I requested a great number of minutes, but I didn't go back that far.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead.
It wasn't for lack of trying to use my PTO. If you look at my pay stubs from 2006, and I have them in the box there, in December of 2006, I tried to use 56 hours of vacation. My wife and I had already booked flights and arrangements, paid for arrangements, prior to promoting to fire chief. I knew it was a terrible time to leave, but we had already paid for it. I was going to try to use some of my vacation benefits. We went to the East Coast, and with the dismay of my wife, I spent almost the entire time on the phone and in business offices where we were staying, attending to district business that needed to be taken care of. We were trying to keep the ship afloat. The next year, I tried one more time. October 2007, we tried to spend a week in Hawaii, and it was a disaster. I was up at 5 a.m. to check the message traffic from the night before, because at 6 o'clock, it would be 8 o'clock back here, and I'd be on the phone with my 2 remaining battalion chiefs and with my administrative secretary, and usually some of the board members, and I would be on the phone with them or in the business office or on the computer, emailing back and forth, trying to deal with some of those issues that we already had. The question I was asked over and over from my then wife was, why are we even here? Why are we trying to do this? I had a job to do. I needed to get it done. We also tried one last time in 2008 for a couple of days in Phoenix, and I'll get to that fiasco in a minute as it comes down through the discussion here. I was even burning time, admin time, because I was trying to make that good faith effort. When the board of directors told me during my first interview, they said, we want you to try to take time off. We want to see you burn your PTO time. I was doing everything I could, including trying to burn it, getting my teeth cleaned, getting my oil changed, whatever I could to put it on documents so that that time would get burned off. And at that point, I would then return to the office and I would do my 12 to 14 hours of work in the office, probably stay in the rest of the night. As a side note, I need to comment, the Reed document would have you believe that my vacation hours were piled on me the minute I was promoted to fire chief. Keep in mind, my vacation accruing rate was actually dropped in 2006 from what it was when I was a battalion chief. And I can argue that inappropriately. As I transitioned from BC to fire chief, I also carried 386 hours of vacation time over that I hadn't burned yet as a battalion chief. That's important to remember, especially when later on in the Reed document it says I hadn't earned those benefits. Of course I earned them. I had them on the books. I carried them with me. I'd like to read 3 affidavits to you, and they are in your packet. They're number 3, 4, and 5. And I can get for you as many more affidavits on this topic as you would like. The first one is from my administrative assistant, who I contacted recently, and I said, just put into words what you saw. And she said, this affidavit is to describe the years Pete Nowicki was fire chief. As hard and as many hours that he and the management team put into running the district, we were constantly under the gun as the demands of under the gun as to the demands of the community, the board of directors, the firefighters, and the outside agencies. Each morning when I arrived at work, Chief Nowicki would already have been at his desk for several hours. Everyone knows he'd still be at his desk or at various community meetings most nights and weekends until at least 11 or 12 o'clock at night. The firefighters were always commenting on how late in the evening he had worked. We often wondered if he ever slept. I can remember that he tried to take one vacation to Hawaii that ended up being a disaster. I don't remember what the all-consuming issue was that we were dealing with, but I do remember that Chief Nowicki spent the majority of his vacation teleconferencing with his battalion chiefs and on the phone and on the computer with other staff members. The work environment, the amount of work, continued to be more consuming as time went on, and taking time off became nearly impossible. And there's the declaration under perjury. If you'd like to speak with her, she's on the phone right now. She said she would stand there until the end of this meeting, until I got back to her to let her know that you may not be interested in contacting her for a teleconference. The next affidavit is from Tanya Hoover, who was at the time my fire marshal. She's now the California State Fire Marshal. Quote, while employed as the fire marshal for the Moraga Orinda Fire District, it was difficult to arrange for vacation time because of the demands of my job and commitment to the district. I believe that was also true of the others within the command staff, as I would be aware of members postponing or canceling their vacation in order to complete district obligations. It should also be noted that during my tenure as the fire marshal with the district, vacation time was lost because of the inability to take time off within the allotted year. And the same holds true for me. I lost time. I gave it back. Exhibit number 5 is from my battalion chief at the time, Brian Collins. Brian went on to become the deputy chief at San Ramon, and right now he serves in the capacity of the fire chief at the Spokane Valley Fire Department. I'm going to read, quote, beginning in the late 1990s, there was a concerted effort by the County Board of Supervisors to reduce the number of fire departments within the county by consolidating some agencies. As part of the strategy, a number of fire chiefs within the agencies were offered early retirement options. With the number of agencies being reduced, there would be less need for duplicated overhead of chief officer positions. Agencies were consolidated across the county, as well as a result of the diminished chief officer staffing. The agencies became flatter and leaner. Generally, I believe that's a good business practice, and the strategy of consolidating and reducing made for a more efficient and effective emergency delivery service in some cases. However, the complexity and volume of work for fire departments increased as the years went on. Thus, the less chief officers staffing those that were doing the work that had to, let me repeat that. Thus, with less chief officers staffing, those that were doing the work had to work harder and longer to keep the pace. The practice of chief officers being able to sell back a portion of their vacation time had been established many years prior and became increasingly necessary, if you will, because of the workload issues. The Moraga Orinda Fire District was very lean at the management level, and during my tenure, everyone from battalion chief rank and above had more work than they could reasonably be accomplished during their normal work schedule. Sellback of vacation was considered to be beneficial to both the employer and the employee, and that the employer had a chief officer that was working and producing, and the employee received some extra compensation in return. These officers were exempt, non-represented employees that did not have the ability to earn overtime pay for extra hours worked. When Chief Nowicki was contemplating moving from battalion chief rank to the chief's position, as a pure battalion chief, I had several long conversations about that position, the commitment necessary, and its level of compensation in relation to that significant commitment. Frankly, given the same level at which he was going to start, he was just paid just slightly more than a BC. Given the fact that the BCs had agreements that provided for some vacation sellback, among other educational incentives, I question why he would want to make a change, taking on the extra responsibility and workload for less compensation at the end of the day. Pete ultimately did choose to test for and accept the position, and as the fire chief, while his base rate of pay was higher than his subordinates, his total compensation was not. I'm not sure at what point the board decided to amend Chief Nowicki's contract to include vacation sellback, or if he had that ability from the beginning, but I'm convinced that it was done for 2 reasons. It allowed for the chief to be present in the district doing his job instead of taking weeks of vacation each year, and it provided for a mechanism to bring his compensation level to that of his subordinates, if not higher, if he were to exchange time off for work time. He's also standing by the phone right now. If anybody would like to conference call with him, he said he would stay there until the end of this day as well. Page 2, line 11, paragraph 3, second sentence. Quote, Nowicki signed the battalion chief's MOU on behalf of the district on June 20th, 2007. A couple of weeks later, he began negotiating for comparable agreements to his own contract, unquote. My response is, let's be clear. Negotiations with all other bargaining groups or individuals were based on the well-being and the needs of those people and being 100% in the best interest of the district. My contract and amendment discussions with the board had absolutely nothing to do with any other discussions in the district. If you look at your next exhibit, this is the calendar of negotiations that I kept on my wall for each position, when the contract expired, and when we would start negotiations. And we would start negotiations 6 months to the day before that contract was going to expire, hoping that we could come to a resolution and we could move on seamlessly into the new contract period. Mine happened to start in June, period. Theirs happened to start at the end of their contract period. There was no overlap or an attempt to make them meld together. If an individual or a group chose not to participate in that time frame, it was on them. It wasn't on me. I started the process, and then it would be up to them to collectively continue the negotiations until its end point. My annual review started in June, period. I'll talk about that more in a little bit too. But what was negotiated in other contracts or when other contracts were finalized had no effect on my position. There is one caveat, and that would be the rare case where there was a legal requirement that if one contract changed, that it had to change all the rest of the contracts, and that would be, an example that would be CalPERS employer contribution towards medical. We didn't have any control over that. If one contract changed, they all changed. Let me explain how the 2007 Battalion Chief contract negotiation worked. First, I had a list of wrongs that needed to be righted, and that's where I'm coming earlier. I talked about those issues that we had while we were battalion chiefs. The first was strike team pass-through pay. If not in its own merit, to pass that money through to the people that served out on the fire lines, at least we might be saving the district a lawsuit. That had nothing to do with me. I no longer went on strike teams. The second necessary correction was shift differential. I made that hour for hour and changed the scope of the hourly requirements. That had nothing to do with me. There's no correlation or understanding for shift differential in the chief's job setting. Those two line items did not affect base salary. They did not change the pensionable status of the contract, and there was no cost to the district. In fact, the pass-through pay may even have added a few dollars to the district. The BCs didn't have to ask me for those changes. I did them on my own, and I was thrilled to do it because they had been wronged for 10 years. The BC bargaining group then also submitted to me a list of their requests. It was my job to sort through the minutia, pull out which ones were appropriate to be considered, and then discuss with the board what would be fair and rational. In this case, it came down to dollars. That was historically tied to Local 1230's negotiations, but we were upside down with Local 1230's negotiations, so we decided to move ahead not only with the battalion chiefs, but with all the other contracts. It bothered me that sometimes one contract would be held in abeyance for the negotiations of another. I never wanted to do that. Every individual, every labor group is their own group and person, and I wanted to treat them fairly and justly. In the end, the BCs were given monetary increases of 1.8% and 2%, as well as stipends for education and longevity. During the period of negotiations, it was my absolute demand that every contract in the district was going to tie into continuing education. The BC's final contract had several crossovers to education, as well as a link to the career development guide. There was an issue when the board started to become concerned on how the BC's contract was going to affect negotiations with Local 1230. I found that personally distressing because, like I say, we treat 1230 fairly and justly. We treat the battalion chiefs fairly and justly. There should be no mixing of the two discussions and contracts. When the negotiation was finalized, it was my job to review the new amendments and make a final recommendation to the board. Again, other than the 3.8% salary adjustment, the finalized battalion chief MOU had nothing that reflected on me, period. There was no negotiating in terms of trying to get something for me. Page 2, paragraph 3, line 9. The MOU also permitted battalion chiefs to sell back 198 hours of vacation time per year, unquote. My response is the BCs always had vacation back from the inception of the district. That benefit was carried over from contract to contract and was untouched. I sold back my vacation every year as a battalion chief. It never was really considered at that time a spiking issue. It was a means of being compensated for time off we could not take. In the year 2000, Chief Johnston took away overtime from the BCs. That was just before I promoted up, so I wasn't privy to overtime, and that made things only worse. The chief still wanted the BCs in the district 70 hours a week and to be on call, but wanted to lower the overtime issue from bumping up positions to cover for the chiefs. If you look at exhibit number 7, in 2004, the chief came to me and asked me, what can we do about this bumping up in overtime? But remember, I want you guys here all the time, and I want you to take your vacations. There was no answer to that. There's no middle ground. So we as battalion chiefs got together and said, we're happy to be here, we need to be here, just bump up our vacation sellback. And that will mitigate the need for overtime from the lower ranks to bump up. In fact, it would save money. They'd be making overtime, we'd be selling back our vacation at an hourly rate. So sell back of vacation time was not something that was thought about towards the end of my career. It was always there. It was something that we always considered in the mix to be able to save the district money, in fact, at certain times. It's also important to remember that for the ideal of something like vacation sellback here, bumping up, let's say, a captain into a battalion chief's position, they couldn't do the administrative work that needed to be done. They would do a great job at doing the daily scheduling. They could keep the operations running, but as that stuff continued to pile up on the desk, they couldn't do human resource stuff. They couldn't do workers' comp issues. They couldn't do discipline or hiring. So they would come in, they would do what we asked them, but once again, the workload would increase, awaiting that battalion chief to come back in. If we could be at our desk, have a chief officer there, that workload will continue to be taken care of. And just to finish off the topic of negotiating the BC's contracts, their contract was open again in 2009. I was so buried in other matters that I asked the board to appoint our negotiator, who was also currently dealing with Local 1230, to deal with that contract as well. That was Mr. Avery who did that. I have a fax from Mr. Avery that points out, if you want verification, that I decided I can't do all the contracts. It states that he took over that process at that time. But prior to appointing Mr. Avery as the negotiator, I advised the battalion chiefs that I would not entertain any new salary increases and that I had fixed everything that I believed needed to be fixed in their contract in 2007. The end results of the new negotiations were no financial increases, just a broadening of the scope of shift differential. That contract was completely handled by our negotiator, Bill Avery. He's down in Los Gatos, and I told him you guys might be calling him as well for verification of that. Page 2, paragraph 3, line 3, quote, some of the terms of the BC contract were similar to Nowicki's 2006 contract, while others were more favorable to the battalion chiefs, unquote. That's inaccurate. What that should say is every single term of the BC's contract is similar or more favorable to Nowicki's 2006 contract. And that same statement would be true in comparing the 2004 BC contract to my contract in 2006. Every single term of it was more favorable than my contract as the fire chief, equal to or more favorable. The BCs had many benefits and sidecars, and deservingly so. Most of those sidecars, some of those sidecars would not even be considered appropriate in a fire chief's contract. However, many of them would, and were in contracts for fire chiefs all across the county. The only item in my contract that was different or showed any more promise than the battalion chief's contract was 3 days of bereavement leave.
Didn't you indicate earlier that you had a 5% increase raise?
Other than salary, I said.
Yeah.
Other than a slightly higher base salary, every single.
Okay.
I'm glad you made that point, though. That is important. I was given 3 days of bereavement leave because at that time I was concerned about my mom. She was starting to fail at that point. And still it begs the question, so what? My pursuits were just going to be the promised putbacks from going from BC to fire chief and appropriate annual salary adjustments as had been promised me by the board. Here's how my performance review and negotiation worked. Once again, it had nothing to do with the timing of any of the other contracts in the district. My contract stated that I would prepare a document each June to indicate my past year's accomplishments and goals for the year. It was to be submitted to each board member to review and comment on. And this is a good time to say that in 10 years of being a chief officer, I was never late, or never did I miss a deadline with the contract, and I sure didn't miss the deadlines for these two June, not contract, document, and I sure didn't miss the deadline for these two June applications of what my goals and accomplishments have been. My comments were then to be reviewed by each board member with their own response to be submitted to the board president, who would then compile them and issue a comprehensive evaluation back to me, August at the latest. It was at that time that we were also to discuss making adjustments to my contract. It could have and should have been all wrapped up in July, August at the latest. I'll describe to you how the 2007 performance review negotiation transpired, and I've obtained copies of all the board agendas so I can do a chronological breakdown of exactly what happened. In June 2007, I provided each board member with a copy of my achievements and goals, and that would be your Exhibit 8. And I'm not going to read that, that's just to show you what was submitted to the board. July 23, 2007, I put my performance review on the closed session, expecting the board would have a response to that document I had submitted to them in June. And I was also asked to agendize a closed session discussion with the negotiator for 12:30. And here's where I need to explain something for my performance review in 2007 and 2008. Nearly every single board meeting also had closed discussions pertaining to Local 1230 or the represented and non-represented employees. And if you turn to Exhibit 9, there's 2 pages there. And I've gone through all the board packets. Here's 2007, and you also see 2008. Each one of those bullet points is a closed session discussion about a labor group or an unrepresented employee who is currently in negotiations. Every time you see a highlighted yellow portion, that is when the board asked me to put myself on the agenda in hopes that we would get to discussing my performance review evaluation as well. And you see how many times that there was numerous discussions for different employees and employee union groups. And it's going to be important to get to in just a second here.
Let me ask you a question. As chief, were you responsible for preparing the agendas for the
Yes.
board meetings?
Yes.
You were the final determiner of what the content of the agenda was?
Well, how it would go is I would list out all of the appropriate necessary points of discussion. I would get in contact with the board president. We would agree upon what those discussion points should be. And he would also then, we would confer as to what we would be appropriate to put in closed session. That information went back to my administrative assistant, who put it on paper. She would give it back to me, I would review it, and it would be in place to make adjustments to until the final posting. And the president would then review it one more time as well.
And did you confer with the district's legal counsel when you prepared the agenda?
Preparing the agenda, no.
Thank you.
One question, follow-up. Was the district council generally in your closed sessions?
Always.
Okay. And you may be getting to it, was your compensation? Certainly your performance was discussed in the closed session. What about compensation? Was that part of your performance evaluation discussion?
Yes, they were tied hand in hand. Depending upon a positive performance evaluation, then we would discuss what the changes or the amendments to the contract would be.
And that all took place in the closed sessions?
Yes.
Thank you. And council was there
Always.
when those discussions took place?
Yes, always. So now you see where there's going to be many, many times when I have been asked to, or I have put myself on the agenda in order for us to discuss my performance review and changes to my contract. The district negotiator always had the floor first, followed by discussions pertaining to the other labor groups and employees. My performance review and contract amendments were always to be discussed last. And invariably, there was never time, and I would be asked to continue the topic on to the next board meeting. It just kept getting pushed down the road. And that's fine. The negotiator for 1230, he was getting paid by the hour. He needed to be first. He needed to have his say so that he could go out the door. I wanted to make sure I took care of my employees. I would always put them in front of me, so I'd always discuss them first. But when push came to shove, I'd be the last one to be discussed, and it would either be too late or we'd be going back into open session. We just never got around to it. I also want to say that at this time, it was around this time it became apparent that the board would benefit by scheduling some workshops on team building and consensus building. A few issues that were specifically addressed during these sessions were timely project completion, as well as the quelling what the amount of work they continuously, individually gave to staff members and as a group gave to staff members. We were a very small management team and we just couldn't keep up with the load. The workshops were very helpful, but not to an end of dealing with two issues that I just stated. I was personally in hopes that it would spur some action on my performance reviews so that it could get done in the months of July and August. They weren't. They just couldn't seem to get to it. I contacted the two facilitators who were there for the team building sessions. One of them is named Cynthia Tablack. She's down in San Jose. And I also put a phone call into Larry Biannotti, who did another team building session. Cynthia is available for you to talk to. She just came back from somewhere yesterday. She couldn't get me an affidavit in time. She said she'd be happy to talk to any of you. And I'm fairly well concerned that Larry Biannotti did not get back because I know he travels the world during the summer months. But I could give you his number as well.
Question for you. If I can ask you to look at your exhibit 14 in the packet that you gave us.
14.
Yeah, exhibit 14.
Yes.
A letter to you from Fred Wild. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Is this letter an example of a discussion that you and the board had in closed session regarding an item of your compensation?
Yes, and I will get to that.
All right, that's fine. I just wanted to confirm that that was an item of discussion in closed session.
Yes.
Thank you.
So once again, my annual review and negotiation was not addressed in July as it should have been. I was asked by the board president not to place my review on the agendas from August through October due to other pressing needs and other district business. Fast forward all the way to November 28, 2007, 4 months from when this should all have been put to bed. In closed session, we discussed Local 1230, Local 2700, and unrepresented employees. Although I was on the agenda, there was no time left for discussing the chief's review. December 3rd, 2007, 5 months after this should have been put to bed, we discussed Local 1230 and Local 2700. Although I was on the agenda, there was no time left in the discussion for the chief's review. December 17th, 2007, before the regular board meeting went to closed session, we discussed the contracts of Local 2700 and unrepresented employees, and we went to open session. Gratefully, at that point, the board said we need to get something done, and they carried over closed session until the end of the meeting that evening. And I remember that meeting very well. It was my first performance evaluation, as well as the first discussions at an adjustment to my contract. They handed me their response to my accomplishments and goals statement from the previous June, along with their completed performance evaluation, which would be your exhibit number 10. Just to give you an idea of what the response back from the board would be.
Are we talking 2008?
No, 2007. We reviewed it. They instructed me to reread it in its entirety, sign it, and respond to it if we wished. And you can see on the last page, I made a comment, and I signed it, and I returned a copy to the board president. I know at this point in our discussion, we also touched upon identifying the need to get some help at the top, that being either an assistant chief or a deputy chief. We just could not continue the pace we were at. Myself and my battalion chiefs were always at the firehouse. We were not getting a chance to go home or even get away. But the timing wasn't right, and I told them that we could table that discussion until a future meeting where I could do a more thoughtful and thorough review on how we could get there and get another management position. We then had an amicable and short conversation on my salary increase. I remember telling them that there had been a historical compaction separation understanding in the district. You don't want all of the different rankings to be all squeezed together. There should be a separation. We discussed that. And there was also a commonplace minimum separation of no less than 8% throughout the county between battalion chiefs and chiefs. We agreed at 7.5% increase, and we also acknowledged that there'd be an FRA adjustment with that as well. Was it a good raise? It was okay. I didn't push it. Afterwards, I did do a spreadsheet to see where I was in comparison to the previous chief who had built-in 6% raises, which would be your exhibit number 11. And prorated out, I had saved this file. On the left side, I have Jim there. That's Chief Jim Johnston. With what he was making when I took over the reins at the prorated out 6% that was built into his contract, how long would it be at my 7.5% increase until I caught him? It was going to be 9 years. That's okay. I wasn't pushing it, and maybe we could make bigger adjustments somewhere down the line. Yes, sir.
How long did Chief Johnson serve as chief?
I believe he was there 7 years.
So you're comparing the salary from him at year 7 to your entry. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Same job. If we want to consider, what's the word I'm looking for? When you're in service for a certain amount of time, you get a stipend for that helping. I'm sorry. Longevity. And it would not be that much money for a longevity increase as well. I'm going into the same job, Sugar Cragmire. Thank you. Apples to apples, like I said, it would be 9 years before I would see parity to the person who I replaced. And that would also, that would not take into account the cost of living increases and those other things that I should have been privy to, even though if you didn't want to compare myself to Chief Johnson, there are still issues in the world that I need to catch up with in terms of compensation. I wasn't complaining, and I didn't complain to the board. I do know that at that time, I also asked the district for a contribution to a vision health plan that would afford me a new pair of glasses each year, as at that time, I was on a rampage of accidentally breaking my reading glasses. That was denied. I also reminded the board that there was an agreement that was made prior to make me whole on my other losses that I experienced from promoting up, and they acknowledged that. The main discussion was vacation sellback. We were finding out that having this benefit returned to my contract, it wasn't as much a discussion of reinstating a promised benefit, but of necessity because I couldn't get away from the district. At this point, my 2006 admin leave had timed out and disappeared, and I was about to start seeing my vacation disappear too. Besides my salary, my PTO was the only other substantial part of my contract. The final discussion was an agreement of selling back 200 hours, and please keep in mind that I had sold back from 2000 to 2006 as a battalion chief. I was just continuing that benefit into this contract. And also remember that I had also carried over 386 hours of my vacation into my new position. We left it at that. Since we were so close to coming upon doing this exercise again in July 2008, we agreed to have the other benefits and have them discussed at that next opportunity when we were going to talk about contract adjustments in the next review period.
These discussions you're referring to were in closed session?
In closed session, the negotiation. The question has been asked, why couldn't I take my PTO? And you've already heard, we tried. And also in that quagmire that I talked about before, it was starting to grow. Gatsby 45 was kicking in. It was now time to rewrite the strategic plan. Collectively, the board had staff prepare no less than 100 new iterations of the budget. I'm now negotiating with 4 developers in the area. Except for the recently ratified BC contract, all the other contracts were on the table. The board wanted the long-range financial plan completely revamped from the first number to the last. That took just a great deal of my and my staff's time. We were hit with the county radio interoperability dilemma, and I'm sure some of you know what that was. It was changing out a radio system that was going to cost millions of dollars for every agency that was going to have to get into the new system in order to be dispatched appropriately. We needed to spec new apparatus for the first time and try to utilize a lease purchase option. We had never tried that before. The Orinda RETF, which is the Revenue Enhancement Task Force. It was an insane crusade which just consumed gobs of my and staff time trying to drain money from the district from a small grouping of folks from the community who wanted to fill potholes instead of buy new fire engines. All of this was topped off with lengthy and monstrous tasks of researching if CalPERS was going to be a better option than Cicera, and if so, how would we process such a changeover? Was anybody here working or with or on the board when that transpired? Because you would have seen me here almost every day, and I would have seen your folks over at our station almost every day. That was a huge study that we went through. The coup de grace was when LAFCO then knocked on the door and began a shocking recommendation that MOFD should dissolve and become part of ConFire so as to better spread the district's wealth to other less affluent areas. And we had to respond to every one of their comments, allegations, meetings, and I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. We finally got around to putting my performance review and negotiation to bed in February 2008. In 4 months, I would have to submit my new accomplishments and goal statement. It should have been a done deal the previous July. This is another perfect time to do another comparison, since the Reed document earlier made an insinuation drawing a comparison between my negotiating with the BCs, and then a couple of weeks later, and that's their comment, I began my own negotiations. And I just want to compare those again so that there's no confusion about what transpired. The BCs received 1.8 the first year, some well-deserved sidecars based upon meeting certain criteria, and strike team pass-through pay, longevity pay, and reinstatement of overtime. I received 7.5% salary adjustment finishing my first year of chief, and the reinstatement of a promised vacation sellback benefit I couldn't otherwise use. I couldn't get time off. I don't know how anybody could equate the two, that I was bird dogging the board trying to get something that I negotiated with the BCs for myself.
Just to be clear, the salary, the 7.5% increase was retro to July 2007?
Yes.
So you got a lump sum payment for the 8 months between
Yes,
July
and I will
February.
get to that here shortly as well.
Also, the vacation sellback was also retro to July 1 of 2007.
Yes, to actually, I think it would be July 10th, because that was the
1-year anniversary.
exactly, thank you.
And also, was retroactivity something that was given to the labor groups?
Everybody got retroactivity, and I'm going to discuss that at length here shortly as well. Yeah, that was standard practice for our district. First, I want to finish off looking at the rest of my 2007 amendment. Besides the 7.5% salary increase and vacation sellback, the amendment shows, quote, a clothing allowance of $75 a month. The Reed document would have the reader believe that they just gave me this allowance for the first time in my amendment. I had been getting a uniform allowance without deviation my entire career, since 1983. All safety employees receive a clothing allowance. It was in my original fire chief contract. The only reason this line item is there is because in the 2006 contract, it was worded same allowance as other sworn personnel. My payroll specialist was concerned that there could be, at some point, differing amounts with different classifications, and asked me to ask the board to put an exact dollar amount. That didn't change. The dollar amount stayed the same. If you want to speak with this person, her name was Linda Pearl. She was my payroll technician. She lives in Napa, and I'm sure the district can give you her contact information. The Reed document also found it necessary to point out, quote, additionally, Amendment 1 provided for a separate FRA increase on top of his base salary raise, unquote. And I see that Mr. Lieberman did correct that in his overhead presentation. If anybody wants to discuss that any further, I'd be happy to do that or explain what FRA is. No, that's fine. We can go past that. So now it's February 2008, and we've just signed off on my July 2007 performance review. If you don't mind, I'm just going to go get another bottle of water right here. Take a collective breath. Okay, so let's move on and let's talk about what happened the weekend of March 14th. The board again has requested the best I could do to take some PTO, and I tried to do that. We planned a 3-day trip to spring training in Arizona. We had our airfare paid, we had the tickets to the games, and all the reservations. And at the last minute, the district was shocked to receive a report from LAFCO attacking the district, and again, further pushing for its dissolution. My response had to be researched, written, and ready for the board by the 17th. And this is not in your board packet, but this is the 18-page response that I had to write from my hotel room while in Arizona, trying to take that PTO that the board asked me to take, or I got out to go to a game and then come right back in and attend to district business. Taking vacation, taking admin leave was just not in the cards. I couldn't do it. And when I did get away, I spent the entire time dealing with district business. Once again, I tried to take a few days off, and once again, I let my family down. As the workload then still increased, I researched how to develop an assistant chief position and pursued that goal with the board of directors. Remember, I had already brought this issue up throughout 2006 at the December 17th board meeting, and I pushed hard again at the January 13 directors workshop, and it was also pushed by the facilitators of that workshop. That time it was Cynthia Tavlik. I engaged individual directors and tried to stress the importance of getting me and my team some help. And I also pleaded my case as part of the board meeting in my presentation on May 21st, 2008. We couldn't keep our heads above water. I couldn't get away from the office, and I was killing my staff as well. Among the many documents I found pertaining to additional staffing while researching this entire response for you, if you go to Exhibit 12, these were my speaking notes when I made a presentation to the board. I can't keep up this pace, none of my staff can. Here's how we can get there, here's how we can finance it. And I didn't want to give you 1,000 different department breakdowns, but I just threw in one as an example. This was Fairfield at the time. For that district, fire chief, 2 deputy chiefs, a fire marshal, and then battalion chiefs. All I had were battalion chiefs, and even then, 2 of them most of the time were either empty because of retirement or out of district because of some other issue. We were so light at the top, we just couldn't keep our head above water, and we couldn't use our PTO benefits. So let's see how the 2008 annual performance review negotiation panned out. The Reed document account says on page 3, paragraph 3, line 1, a few months later, May 2008, Nowicki began negotiating the second amendment to his 2006 contract, unquote. You'd think I had nothing better to do than negotiate contracts on my own behalf. It was a few months later because the board didn't get around to the first one until February earlier of that year. It was supposed to have been done July before that. Further, the May meeting was not a negotiation. It was an attempt to streamline the performance review process so we wouldn't be faced with that again in the following year. What I gave them at that meeting is your Exhibit 13, which is, I researched and rewrote a performance review evaluation which would be user-friendly. They could just check the boxes and put a notation next to it and get it right back to the president so we could move on. That's what I presented in terms of the chief's performance review.
Mr. Nowicki,
Yes.
in your contract, it said that a mutually acceptable outside professional would do your review. Is that did not occur?
That did not occur.
Thank you.
So I presented them with the user-friendly survey document where the directors could check the boxes. It was a no-fuss, no-mess method. We could accomplish this quickly, but there were no negotiations. But it did involve my performance evaluation. In closed session on June 18th, 2008, as required by my contract, I submitted my accomplishments and goals to the board. I told them again I had no way of using what they considered one of my better benefits, and they needed to address it immediately. If we couldn't talk about it without delay, I asked for a waiver to put on hold all of my PTO from disappearing because I couldn't use them. I also, once again, reminded them of the promise that was made to me by Chief Johnston and Director Nathan back in 2006 that after my successful, what they called a probationary period, I would be made whole via adjusting some of the terms of my contract to mirror what I had as a battalion chief. In order to re-verify what I had been promised, because now there are some it's been a while, there's been, I believe, a change of at least one director. President Weil contacted ex-director Nathan to confirm that that conversation actually took place. I talked to Director Weil the other day. He once again reconfirmed it to me, and I would encourage you to contact Director Weil as well. I did receive the waiver on July 15th. That's your Exhibit 14. At this point, the Reed document conveniently ignores the next 5 months and jumps to December 10th, but I need to review those 5 months for you, because this is when I'm trying to, once again, get them to come to the table, do my performance review, and make those appropriate adjustments to my contract. The next time I'm shown on the agendas for closed session are July 16th, August 20th, and September 3rd. It was at the July meeting that we first discussed my contract. I spoke first because I wanted to know something, and I'm so sorry that we don't take notes in closed session. But what I said to them was, and I told them I wanted to speak first so they wouldn't feel uncomfortable. I told them I won't ask you for a salary raise, and if you offer me one, I will refuse it. And that's because the economy was tanking, and we were upside down in labor negotiations with 1230. I couldn't justify taking a salary raise while my firefighters were still in that battle trying to obtain one for themselves. But the issue remained that I was continuing to accrue PTO, I couldn't use it, and overcoming that problem was paramount. No action was taken that night, but I was satisfied that the board recognized the severity of those issues again at that point. I believe we were once again faced with concentrating on other closed session items on August 20th and September 3rd because we didn't discuss my issues at either of those meetings. However, they were on the agenda. There was nothing to report out. Those dates, they showed Local 1230 and myself in that time slot, so there's no doubt that it was Local 1230 they were talking about, or we were talking about.
And, excuse me, in those closed sessions, was there discussion of your performance, or was it solely the discussion was anticipated of the salary, the benefits, or not an increase in salary, but?
In those discussions, there was no discussion about me at all. They tabled it and asked me to re-agendize it at a later date.
Okay.
The answer was going to be simple, though. I was promised vacation sellback in 2006. I couldn't use my PTO benefits that were considered a major portion of my contract. They're now starting to back up. I'm going to lose them all, and it's a pretty straightforward solution to be able to combine those two issues and solve both the problems. It wasn't until closed session on December 17th when we were able to have a structured meeting, and I gave I was given a copy of the director's response to my accomplishments and goals, and we discussed that document. We next discussed my contract.
Which year are we in? Excuse me.
December 17th of what?
08 or 07?
08.
We're in 08 at this point.
08, thank you.
We also discussed the tremendous workload and the need once again for another position in the administration, and once again how I was about to lose my PTO. In order to preserve my earned benefits that I couldn't be used, they allowed me via Amendment 2 to convert my administration leave to vacation and sell back 260 hours of vacation each year. Having one sell back in each calendar year, as well as being able to preserve my admin leave that wouldn't be timed out, was nothing more than helping me preserve my benefits that I had already earned and accrued. The answer was simple. I had a benefit I couldn't use. I was promised vacation sellback in 2006. It's now been 2.5 years, and fulfilling that promise and reinstatement of sellback resolved both of those issues.
May I ask you a question?
Yes.
Did you prepare Amendment 2?
Did I prepare the amendment?
Yes.
No.
Do you know who did?
The president.
And that amendment was discussed in closed session and adopted?
No, it wasn't adopted in closed session. It was discussed in closed session, and I will, once again, I will get to how that document was then agendized, discussed, and voted in open session.
Okay, go ahead.
Actually, I have one thing. Was Mr. Avery present for your negotiations?
He was not. I acted as my own negotiator. Those were two of the line items discussed in Amendment 2, and I want to review the other ones just for the sake of clarity. 5.5, quote, the employee shall accrue paid vacation credit at the rate of 28 hours a month, unquote. It was in this contract period I was due for a vacation step-up increase, as are all safety employees at MOFD in their 25th and 26th year. In 2008, there were only 2 employees in the district who were eligible for the step-up in this benefit, and I was one of them. And if you go to exhibit number 15, you'll see the step-up and the vacation accruals as stated in the line contract. Staying dedicated to an organization and promoting through the ranks in an agency should be rewarded, and the district always saw to that. The read document would have you believe that I was receiving some sort of special benefit, or I negotiated a side benefit just for myself. 5.6, quote, the employee may have paid holidays off from work the same as the manner of the battalion chiefs. That was just a verbiage cleanup requested by my payroll specialist. It was simply to properly indicate that I was a safety member and not clerical. Education credit. The employee is required to successfully complete 80 hours of continuing education annually in order to enhance his ability to perform his duties of fire chief of the district, unquote. As a chief officer, I embraced myself on the concept of never ask someone else to do something that you wouldn't do yourself. I didn't allow any do as I say in my administration. It was going to be a team effort, or you weren't going to be on the team. As the fire chief, I maintained all of my certifications and qualifications. My paramedic license, my Class B driver's license, my SCBA fit test, my instructor credentials, instructing credentials for which I needed to teach X number of hours a year. I was the first one each year to get the physical, the first person to do the annual fitness testing, the first person to perform the PAC test, and the first person to perform every skill and mandate that I expected of all my other employees. When I adopted the wellness initiative that required all safety members to exercise at least an hour a day, I exercised at least 1 hour every day, and I made sure the troops saw it. I went around to each station on different days and exercised in their stations so they knew there was going to be no deviation from the top all the way down to the probationary firefighter. Again, when we began negotiations with all employees and individuals in the district, they were all forewarned there would be some special part of their contract that was specifically tied to an educational mandate. I specifically had the board include that line into my contract as well. I didn't want there to be any misinterpretation that I wasn't going to be held to the same standards as everyone else. The only difference was I would be the only one in the district who was not being compensated for the performance. I would simply be required to complete the 80 hours of education as part of my job description. There's a few more things I want you to know about me as a chief during that time frame. I also took 20% of the on-call duty for which the battalion chiefs got a stipend for. I didn't get a stipend, nor did I ask to be compensated. I also responded to every fire in the district while I was chief. Most chiefs only respond to greater alarms or special calls. My battalion chiefs and my dispatchers knew I wanted to be toned out on every working fire. If I didn't assume an IC role, I would at least act as a liaison to mutual aid units or meet with the occupants and help them start their process of healing and dealing with the emergency. Once again, the other chiefs in the other counties did get that stipend, a number of them. I thought that would be unfair and inappropriate. Okay, back to the second contract amendment. What happened then? In October, all of our focus changed when we had the death of one of our firefighters. Sad as it was, time was still going by without the board addressing my evaluation and my amendments to my contract, even though I continuously put myself on the board agenda for discussion. It was always more imperative to talk about Local 1230, and I absolutely agree with that. It's the troops before me, and it's the negotiator who's getting paid to be there before me. My best recall was that the next time we discussed my performance review and my negotiation was on November 19th, when the board unanimously agreed to the wording and we agreed to the terms that I just described in Amendment 2. We had an agreement. And now I'm going to go sideways just a little bit because I'm trying to follow the read document, and I want to attend to some of the quotes and respond to those. It jumps a little bit back and forth from 2007, 2008, so we'll try to follow this bouncing ball here. paragraph 3, line 1, I'm sorry, page 3, paragraph 1, line 5, and this part of the discussion shifts back to amendment number 1. Quote, the newly added vacation sellback provision gave Nowicki a one-time vacation sellback of up to 200 hours of accrued vacation time, formerly non-cashable vacation time, unquote. That's right, vacation time, this is my response, vacation time just like I had when I was a battalion chief from 2000 to 2006 when I was a battalion chief. This was the vacation sellback that I was promised would be written into my contract when I finished my first year. This is the vacation sellback that fit perfectly fit the bill for me to counter the inability to take days off my PTO, which were supposed to be one of the big portions of my benefit package. And once again, let me be absolutely clear, if I wasn't going to be privy to the reinstatement of this benefit and some sort of salary increases, there's no way I would have taken the position of chief and jumped into that quagmire. Page 3, paragraph 1, line 5, second sentence, quote, despite being executed in February of 2008, the amendment conferred all of this added value retroactive to July 10th, 2007, unquote. And this gets to the question you had asked. That's absolutely right. Every single contract that had been ratified at MOFD, and probably, I hesitate to guess, most of the contracts throughout the entire county, as far as I can remember, have been retroactive back to the point of the expiration of the previous contract. There's only one contract that I can remember in the county, and I think that was around 2007, that didn't go retroactive in this fashion.
In my department.
Sorry?
I was questioning the retroactive that you were referring to happening in other departments. And I worked for the county for 30 years, and I don't remember ever seeing it.
Well, and the county doesn't, but this is a separate agency, it's a different.
And I'm primarily talking about other fire districts. I don't know what happens in other agencies.
Okay.
But let me just quickly ask, what discussions, if any, with council dealt with the potential for inappropriate gifts? Retroactive pay can clearly be looked at, and I think most governmental employees, certainly at senior levels, understand that if you elect to pay somebody for services already rendered, for which they've already been paid, that can be seen as being inappropriate and a gift to that individual with public monies. What discussions and understanding did you have of this issue when this was approved?
There was no discussions at all because it was standard practice and it had been for decades. It was considered if you can't get the contract solved, especially when it's the management that's dragging their feet, that you shouldn't hold the employee group or the employee responsible for their inability to negotiate the contract. There was no discussion. It wasn't
So never
expressed
raised
as.
by council or others?
No.
All right, thank you.
The only time that I can remember this going retroactive, and like I said, I believe it's 2005, 1985, 1986 timeframe. There was, at the conclusion of negotiations, everybody in the district received a $1,000 check so that the payroll team would not have to backdate calculations all the way back to when the expiration of the last contract was. Retroactive contracts are MOFD standard, they always have been, and like I say, especially when it's not the employee who's dragging their feet. Page 3, paragraph 2, line 1. On February 8th, 2008, 2 days after the adoption of Amendment 1, Nowicki sold back 200 hours of previously accrued and non-cashable vacation time for $18,600. My answer, yeah, I utilized and earned a PTO negotiated benefit. And please don't forget that I came into this position with 386 banked hours that were saleable and I earned them. Page 3, paragraph 3, line 4. Quote, however, the minutes of the board's December 10th, 2008 meeting do not include any details of Nowicki and the district's negotiations or discussion about the amendment's term, in particular the terms of its increased cash compensation, unquote. My response, there would be no minutes. It was closed session. We don't take minutes in closed session. I don't know of any agency that does. However, we've always had legal counsel in the room for direction. And at this time, while I take a drink of water, I have one of my directors, he just walked out the door. Perfect. Director Mancinelli, timing is everything. Director Mancinelli was one of the directors while I was there at the district. He has volunteered to come in and answer any questions, and he said he would also like to make a statement. You know what, I'll just continue until he comes back in.
And I just want to ask one more time to just be very clear. There wasn't anything in writing then, other than the verbal agreement of the former chief and the president of the board that
That's right.
would get this buyback. At what point did you anticipate you'd be retiring at age 50?
I anticipated I was gonna stay the course until I was 55.
You
I had
anticipated-
no doubt that I would be
Okay,
in that seat till 55.
okay, and then at what point did you change your mind and think, you know what? Now I think I'm gonna go in this direction and retire when I'm 50.
Can you wait till I kind of get to that here,
Okay,
because I'm gonna,
That's fine.
yeah.
If you're gonna, well, that'll be the crescendo, that's fine.
Okay, great, thanks.
Sir,
Yes.
did Local 1230 receive retro at that time, do you know, in terms of contracts for MFOD?
They always received retro when we negotiated our contracts concurrently with them. When we split off and the contract timing became different, then I stopped following what was happening with Local 1230. But my troops, they expected it. There was a historical precedent, there was past practice, and we would make that whole.
Okay, thank you.
Director Mancinelli, I was going to introduce you, apparently just as you walked out the door here, I was going to give you an opportunity because we are talking about the 2008 contract amendment, and this is when you came into the picture, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity to express any ideas that you had. I know you have another obligation, so if you'd like to make a statement.
If I can answer any questions of the board about December 10th.
Let me ask you to go up to the microphone, which is being recorded. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just saying if the board had any questions about the December 10th, unfortunately, that was actually my first meeting. So I was sworn in that night in closed session, but I do have recollections regarding the amendment that was made, and I did vote on that amendment.
Could you kindly state your name? I didn't catch
I'm
it.
sorry, Brooke Mancinelli, I'm a former director of Moraga Orinda Fire.
And you served from when to when?
2008, December 2008 till about, well, let's see, February 2012.
So you served with one term?
Yes.
Bill, do you recall, was all discussion of compensation then in the closed session?
Generally speaking, and I'm speaking broadly over that 4-year term, compensation was discussed in closed session, but when we came out and we had reportable action as directed by our attorney, we reported on that reportable action. If there was an agreement reached and an agreement was prepared for the public, it was provided at that time once we came out of closed session, correct.
And did you generally have public present? Did you have people comment on those?
I'd like to say that, yeah, they were all very well-attended meetings. To be quite honest with you, fire district operations are not, they're not widely attended. We had several individuals that would show up on a semi-regular basis. On December 10th, when the amendment was made, I couldn't tell you through recollection who was in there.
Well, and as you looked at compensation, I'm sorry, I don't mean to, I was just
No,
going to
no.
sort of do a follow-up, Will.
I'm following you.
Were you given any actuarial valuation, ramifications of your decisions, of how that would play out with regard to the various agreements you were reaching?
Absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely. So, and once again, I'm speaking very broadly across a 4-year term. So we actually would request that. Mr. Avery has been brought up multiple times. That was one of his primary functions as our chief negotiator, was to deliver to the board the ramifications of those decisions that were made.
so do you recall when this vacation PTO time is added back in, was there any discussion by the board of how that might play into?
I was assured by the other members of the board that this had been a long negotiated thing, and it was just now coming.
And were you under any impression at that time in 2008 that the chief is going to be retiring soon?
No, in fact, I cannot recall the date, but there was something I read when I read the Reed Smith memo. There was something about Chief Nowicki's notification to employee groups or whatnot, and I can't tell you it was exactly that date,
Okay.
but that is when I was aware that he was retiring.
When he informed the employee groups?
Yeah, and
not
I
at the time.
apologize, I don't have the date right in my head from
No,
the
that's
Reed
right
Smith
away.
memo.
Thank
So,
you.
First off, was a clarification on the term that you served.
December 10th, 2008 was when I was sworn in, and I believe I left the board February 28th, 2012.
Okay. And then I was having questions following Supervisor Anderson. When the discussions happened in closed session regarding compensation or whatever in terms of benefits and all that stuff, negotiations, that was, just to be clear, that was always brought out to open session in terms of the amount, and it was discussed. That was.
Yeah, so when there was reportable action as directed by our attorney at the time, was Steve Myers, Myers-Nave, we brought out if an agreement was brought, those that were already prepared were delivered to the public. And that there was also, generally speaking, and I can't tell you on X, Y, or Z date what the agenda said, but there was usually an open session item that was scheduled relative to, for example, say 12:30 in a contract negotiation. There would be a closed session item, and there would be a follow-on open session item, particularly if the board was hopeful that we were going to reach an agreement. There were multiple times with several of the employee groups where there would be both a closed session item regarding compensation and negotiation and an open session item, and we would strike that open session item because an agreement was not reached in closed session. When we came out of closed session, as historical practice shows, and I'm sure the minutes would show as well, there was a lot of times we would report out, there was no reportable action. I mean, we hadn't agreed on anything, and we were still negotiating issues. Items had to be taken back to the labor group, the real estate negotiator, the attorneys, whatever. We came out and we're not gonna say, well, these are the elements that we're still discussing at that time, so.
Well, no, and I'm just sort of doing follow-up on Will,
Please,
but actually,
sure.
no, but, so there are two different discussions I'm looking at. One, you have labor negotiations where you're negotiating with the union. Then you also have the fire chief's contract. With the fire chief's contract, those discussions are you articulating that you had the discussion, you sort of reached a decision in the closed session, and then you came out and reported it, or was there some different format that took place?
It was pretty much the same thing. In fact, without going crazy and trying to recall, generally our counsel was present during the closed session, whether or not the agency group had a representative, like, for example, Chief Nowicki. Present was debatable depending on what we were discussing, but our counsel was present and directed us what our reportable action to make sure that the verbiage was correct in accordance with the Brown Act. So if we have no reportable action, it was confirmed by counsel, and when we were there, we would report out no reportable action. Sorry.
Sure. Just to clarify, you did say it was your first meeting, Lucky, of December 10th, 2008? Okay, so you
That's why I remember it well.
That's right, okay, it's helpful that you remembered well. So the Reed memo suggests, or says that the board did approve the compensation or the amendment at that time.
Amendment 2, correct.
Yeah, so you participated in that, so
Yes.
Presumably you voted, I don't know how the vote went, but
5 to 0.
5 to 0, okay. And it said, but the minutes of the board's meeting do not include any details of the district's negotiations or discussion about the amendment's terms. Was it just approved, there's an amendment and we're approving it, but we're not
Correct.
discussing any of the...
And without that agenda directly in front of me, I was actually sitting behind you trying to pull up old agendas. Unfortunately, the district website only goes back to 2010 for certain minutes. I'm sure that's available, but there would have been an open session, as was considered. I mean, during my term, we would have brought it out in an open session where there would have been public comment on that. The board actually kind of went one length further and said, once the motion was made either to adopt or reject, there was public comment available just about solely about the motion. I mean, it was really a very, very considerate process in my opinion.
But I'm just going by what this,
Sure.
this review
Yeah.
suggests, and it suggests that there's no reference in the minutes at all.
Correct, and it would have come out.
So presumably that's accurate, that there's no reference.
Correct, I don't have the December 10th, 2008 minutes in front of me.
Okay, if I could have one other follow-up question, it puts you in an awkward position, I guess, to speak about someone else's comments, but the Reed memo goes on to suggest that one of your fellow board members said, quote, "The board members deliberately made the changes in Amendment 2 to help Nowicki increase his pension, and that he had presented them with calculations documenting the effect." Do you agree with that? That it was deliberately done to help him increase his pension?
I was there on December 10th, 2008, and any discussions that took place before that, I certainly was not privy to.
Well, but this is referencing the amendment that you approved.
Correct. My deliberative privilege, in the sense that why I voted yes or no is different. I can tell you my thoughts on it.
So do you agree with that characterization, that it was done primarily to increase
No.
his pension?
I don't.
Okay, so what's your understanding of why?
Very much in line with what Chief Nowicki has been presenting here today, which is that he had a benefit, paid time off in various forms that he was never able to use. And I can tell you that during my 4 years on the board, we swapped staff, and it was only a portion of the time, and I can't tell you the exact dates, but it was probably a year of my time on the board, or just under a year of my time on the board. It was a very, 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 very busy time. Shortly thereafter, we'd hired a new fire chief as well, which Chief Nowicki was a part of. And so that was just more time added to the staff role. Shall
Thank you.
So you're sworn in, I think you said you were sworn in closed session, is that right?
Correct, so that I could legally sit in closed session. District council said I needed to be sworn in beforehand, and then Judge Kennedy actually attended open session, and there should be something in here about Judge Kennedy installation and swearing in ceremonies again, so we did it twice that night.
So when you discussed the amendment number 2 in closed session, were you told by the other board members that they previously discussed it at the November meeting?
That they had been previously discussing it all along, correct. And they didn't sit down and say, we discussed it on X, Y, or Z dates, but that it had been a long-standing discussion that had been going on, correct.
And did you have the actual amendment number 2 in writing in front of you?
You know, I don't want to say I did or did not, because I can't recall specifically. I would believe that we did, particularly because approval of the amendment to the fire chief's employment agreement was done in open session, so that a copy of that agreement would have been provided at open session. So if it was available, it would have been given to me. So just based on looking at the minutes here, my recollection of the night, we were probably given a copy of contract amendment 2.
But you don't know if you were given a copy?
I wouldn't, bet the farm on it, no.
And you don't know if the public was given a copy or if it was made available?
My understanding of the Brown Act per council guidance would have been that it would have been required. If we were approving a document, it had to be provided to the public in closed session for public comment.
Yeah, and I'm asking you about what you specifically recollect. Do you
Correct.
know if a copy of that amendment was made publicly available at the December 10 meeting?
I would not sit here and tell you yes, because that would be just, I'm restating what was the district policy in all the time that I was there. I would assume it was, but I can't sit here and jump up and down and say, yes, I remember it being handed out. I would assume, yes, it was available in accordance with the Brown Act.
Are you aware that on December 10th, in the report out from closed session, that the minutes reflect that there was nothing to report out from a discussion of the fire chief's performance evaluation?
Continue, only because that there would be potentially a continuation is what it says here. Report of closed session action. Fred Weil states that because of time constraints, discussion of closed session items will be continued to the conclusion of the regular session. Looking at this, report of closed session action. Upon return from closed session at 10:37, Fred Weil reported that there will be no reportable action. Public employee performance evaluation regarding the fire chief. I would assume he only said that because of, and this is the minutes, unfortunately it's not the agenda. I don't know what else was calendared for that night, if a 12:30 or a 2700 or an unrepresented employee thing happened that night as well. I can't tell you. But because there's an open session agenda item here referring to approval of the amendment, that would probably, for the purposes of these minutes, delivered the report of what happened in closed session. We're now discussing the approval of the amendment.
So you had a discussion about the amendment after it was adopted?
Well, like I said, I'm only speaking in terms of my 4-year term. This was my first night. I cannot tell you exactly what was discussed or who spoke and said what on that night. But what I can tell you is that if we were sitting here discussing approval of the chief's contract, there would have been discussion on it. In fact, thinking back to some of my co-directors, it probably was rather loquacious, and it was probably long-winded, but I can't sit here and tell you exactly who said what.
Without going into the specifics, and not to beat a dead horse here, it sounds as if, you correct me if I'm wrong, you could conclude that this amendment was approved in closed session, and that then there was a conscious decision on someone's part, perhaps board chair, I don't want to impugn his motive, not to report anything in the public session.
Well, I'm sitting here looking at,
No reportable item is what I'm,
under the report of closed session action, it's saying that we're gonna continue till later. Now I'm just looking at the minutes that was provided to me here. It says there was no reportable action. There's been an open session agenda item that discussed approval of the amendment. It doesn't give, it was motion seconded, a roll call vote to approve the fire chief's amended employment contract. So at that point, my recollection is that a copy of Amendment 2 would have been provided to the public. We're now discussing exactly that happened in closed session. Well, I don't know if there were other agenda items in closed session. We routinely scheduled 3 or 4 items, but we only had about 30 minutes to go through them, and we routinely reported out no action because we never discussed that item. If there was something for 1230, 2700, there were multiple theoretical bargaining groups that we never got to. And so we went back into closed session and reported out that there was no action. Any report of closed session or any report was given in this open session agenda item that I'm reading right here.
So to be clear, sir, there is an open agenda item discussing the amended contract with the chief?
For these minutes there is, yes.
Okay.
Just a couple of questions. Pete Wilson and John Wyro were on the board at the December 10th meeting.
Yes, I believe it was a 5-0 vote, so yeah.
So it's a five person. And at that meeting, you don't recall then Chief Nowicki presenting the calculations as to the effect that this would have on his retirement benefit.
I don't have a total, I'd like to sit here and tell you, yeah, I remember every word, but I don't. What was discussed, I do remember them saying that this had been a non-standard in our ongoing negotiation with the fire chief.
So that presentation by Chief Nowicki could have occurred at, say, the November meeting, which you were not present at.
Correct. And I do know that I recall Chief Nowicki had actually left the room when they were talking to me about the amendment. So, talking about the ongoing negotiation. District council would have been in the room and the board. So.
I want to clarify. So, were you here during Mr. Lederman's presentation in
Yes.
PowerPoint? So we saw, for the first time I saw, a letter that apparently Cicera received on November 25th of 2008, 2 weeks before your meeting, in which he seems to indicate to a counselor that he has every intention of retiring on January 30th.
I recall that from the presentation.
And I thought I heard you say you don't recall that ever coming up in the conversation, that the chief might be retiring shortly?
No, we did not.
And so you didn't hear other board members talking about it, because obviously it was your first meeting, and you said you relied on them.
Correct. I was relying on, what they were telling me in the meeting. Correct.
Okay.
So thank you. That was Mr. Lederman's presentation was the first I had seen that letter to the council.
Well, and with that, as a new board member, had you had an orientation by the chief prior to your first meeting?
The only thing I had was a short meeting with the attorney, Steve Myers, just basically talking about separation. I think, and this is me surmising a little bit, but as an active firefighter, I think that they just wanted to sort of the attorney wanted to sort of restate the obligations and roles of director.
Okay, but you weren't aware, again, just to make you restate it one more time, because I asked you this early on, when you voted for this, you weren't aware that the chief was going to be retiring?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
You say you were a firefighter? Were you a firefighter?
I still am, and I was then, and I still am today.
I see, okay. So you work under Chief Nowicki?
No.
No.
I work for a different agency.
I'm sorry.
Francisco.
Oh, San Francisco, I'm
I work
sorry.
in San Francisco.
I misunderstood.
That's okay.
Sir, your term lasted past his retirement. And
Yeah.
was there any, and I don't even know if you can speak to this, but was there any feeling or discussion amongst other board members that they were manipulated or in any way?
No, in fact, we as a board sat down and wrote a letter in response to the Wall Street Journal article, which I'm sure some of you have seen, in defending the board's sort of role in that, in the thing, trying to correct some of the record we felt was incorrect with the Wall Street Journal's account. So there wasn't, we certainly weren't feeling like we were obscured or whatnot at that point. So any statements by a director, I can't say, speak to.
Thank you.
Speaking of that Wall Street Journal article, there's one of your co-directors, Mr. Sperling, who was the vice president at the time. He's quoted as having said, "I don't blame him," speaking of Mr. Nowicki. "The system itself is broken. We need to change the system." Puts you in an unusual position to have to perhaps get into his mind, but what do you think he's talking about?
You know, I really don't know. If he was giving quotes separate of that, I wasn't part of it. And let me, just getting back to the Brown Act, we had a very, very conservative attorney, and I sat with four very, very, very conservative fellow directors. And when I say conservative, they were incredibly cognizant of ensuring that proper notification went out. And I say to other, questions that, well, you don't know that that was provided. Our counsel at the time, Steve Myers of Myers-Nave, was very, very experienced and very, very deliberate, ensuring we did not go astray. So I didn't have any discussion with Frank to sit down and say, well, what do you think about this? Or Fred to say, what do you think about this? And as a new director, I was particularly nervous of the Brown Act because it was a little bit new to me. And I didn't want to have conversations with anybody for fear that I might go astray in the Brown Act.
But you don't know what he may have been referring to when he was talking about the system being broken? What system is he talking about?
I'm assuming he was talking about Cicera. Based on what you're talking about, and it was in as part of the Wall Street Journal article, I would assume he was talking about Cicera, but I don't know.
So he couldn't have been talking about Orinda Moraga?
Only as a participant in Cicera, maybe? I don't, this is me, like you said, trying to get inside the head of Director Sperling. And I wouldn't stand here for Frank and say, oh, this is what Frank would meant. He's his own person, he's his own, he'd been sitting on the board longer than me, so he certainly had more historical knowledge of the board's direction than I did. So.
I believe part of the focus of the Wall Street Journal article was that the amount of pension benefit that Chief Nowicki would commence receiving was far greater than his then base salary. How much did you recognize in approving Amendment number 2? And you indicated you had a fair amount of both economic, statistical, actuarial background provided to you. How much did you recognize that that was going to be the case in approving, at least in part, Amendment 2?
I knew that, just from my experience as a firefighter and a participant in other similar public pension systems, that Chief Nowicki's final year's calculation may not necessarily be the calculation that Cicera would sit back and look at for the computation of his pension. And I knew that the battalion chiefs had a very lucrative contract sitting in front of them. And very potentially, his pension was never going to be based on his final year as fire chief. It was going to potentially be based on his biggest year, which could have come to him. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you, oh, it was this year and it was that, because I don't have those numbers in front of me. But I knew that his largest 12 months was going to be used for his computation of his pension.
So in writing your reply letter, sounds like you were a part of that. To the
I was
Wall
aware
Street Journal.
of what was being written, yes. But
Okay. You were comfortable with the defense of the differential in amounts between final
without
base
having-
salary and?
Yes, I was, but it was signed by and it was written by Director Sperling. It was not a board document that went out. It wasn't we didn't bring it back to, as an ad hoc committee and say, okay, well, what do you guys want to write, this, that, and the other thing. It didn't come back to the board for approval. That was a letter from Frank Sperling to the Wall Street Journal.
Okay, not from the board.
Was that? Yeah, no. In fact, yeah, that would not have flown in terms of, one person, particularly the vice president, speaking for the board. And so it would have been, if it were speaking for the board, it would have come from the then board president.
Okay. Any further questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Oh, just one more
Sure.
question. When did you first become aware that Chief Nowicki was retiring?
A date, I don't, to be honest with you. I would guess it was probably sometime around the email that I saw in the Reed Smith report that came out.
December 13th?
Is that the date? I mean, you're telling me the date, and so I'm guessing.
I'm reading on December 13th, 2008, 3 days after executing amendment number 2.
I don't recall the exact
email.
date, but it would have been after December 10th. I mean, it leaves you a pretty broad window, right? And so what the Lederman report,
How does the board feel about that? Just granting him a new amendment to his contract, and 3 days later he announces he's
I was
retiring.
shocked. I was shocked. In terms of, just that it was the first I'd heard about it, but I was also a new director, and to be honest with you, I was probably quiet about it, just being new in the role, and so,
Do you think the other board members were as shocked as you were?
I don't know. Like I said, we had one social function a year, and that was we had an annual board dinner where no business is discussed, and we would just get together and, with our wives and discuss other things. And so there was very little interaction between the board members.
Were you surprised at all with the tone of the memo that basically said it really doesn't make much difference because it's kind of status quo, I'm still hanging around?
I mean, tone in terms
I
of,
mean, what did that mean to you that, it really doesn't make much difference because I'm sticking around anyway?
as a retired annuitant,
But he said, I'm not going anywhere because the board's going to cut me a special deal to stick around anyway.
I remember thinking to myself as essentially a retired annuitant coming back, I was thinking in terms of how much the district was gonna save and not paying benefits anymore. Certain benefits that were no longer gonna be paid to him. So I was thinking in terms of, here's where we're saving money. So, that's kinda how I looked at it. I felt that, that was the focus. To hire him back, my personal feeling was, as a fire chief, was it's a money save, it's a cost savings to the district.
When were the discussions and the agreement done to hire him back?
I don't remember specifically.
Not in the December 10th meeting?
No.
The January meeting?
I'm trying to be honest with you, I'm trying to even remember when those discussions happened to hire him back. And they could have already been occurring, you have to understand, they could have already been occurring prior to my arrival on the board. And I looked at, I'll tell you just from my perspective, when I voted to approve that contract amendment on December 10th, that thing was passing no matter what. If I had abstained, that I voted against, it was 4-1, 4-0, 5-0. It was passing. So if conversations had been happening prior, I can't sit here and tell you they were or they weren't. So I wasn't privy to closed session negotiation. I know my role, just coming on December 10th that day, it doesn't lend a lot of historical perspective to you trying to make your decisions, and I apologize for that, but I was willing to come here and at least attest to the decisions that were made.